welcome to I Love This Thing So Frigging Much, a podcast about passion. My name is Sophie Katz, and today I am joined by Soks, an artist. Welcome to the show, Soks.
Hello.
Hello. So, here is how this works. Soks will have 3 minutes to talk about something that they love. This can be a person, place, thing, concept, activity, anything they want. Our only requirement is that they love it wholeheartedly and want to tell us why. Are you ready, Soks?
I am.
All right. Here is the timer. Now, what do you love so frigging much?
So I love cryptozoology and fairy tale history. Cryptozoology is considered a semi-science. It is the science of creatures that don't quite fit the mold. Things like Mothman and unicorns and dragons. All different cultures have mythological creatures and stories along with them. We also have the fairy tale history, which Grimm's Fairy Tales is the most popular, well-known ones, but the Grimm brothers actually didn't write any of them. They collected the stories that were passed down for centuries. And a lot of different places have very similar fairy tales. Cinderella is a good example, actually, because you've got the most popular version, which is the French version, but it was actually written in 1697, whereas like the oldest recorded version of Cinderella is the story of Rhodopis, which was written between 7 BC and 23 AD. It was about a Greek slave girl that married a Egyptian king. So oral traditions really inspire me for either my art or just in general. I love researching different fairy tale histories or just different ways that the world and different cultures view certain mythological creatures. Unicorns are a very good example because there are so many different versions. There's the popular version that we know, that's the European unicorn, which is the horse with the one horn. Up until the 1960s, it was actually a very fearsome creature. Like the only way you could calm it down was to get a bare-breasted virgin to soothe it. Peter Beagle in 1962-ish wrote the book The Last Unicorn, which actually introduced the first female unicorn in all of history, and slowly just snowballed into the unicorns that we have today. But there are very other different unicorns like Asia and India. The unicorns in Asia, the Quirrell or Quirin, were actually very benevolent creatures, and they're very strange looking with like lion parts and elephant parts and all these other things. But unicorns have been all throughout history in all different lands. A lot of people believed that with Marco Polo actually wrote about unicorns when he saw rhinoceroses. A lot of people believed that unicorns were real and that unicorn horn was the most precious thing you could ever have. It was a cure-all. In fact, a lot of Vikings would catch narwhals, which are described as unicorns of the sea, or the sea unicorn by like Moby Dick and other...
Go ahead and finish your thought.
And other various things.
That's fascinating. Thank you for coming to tell us about this today, Soks.
Yeah.
Could you tell me, you mentioned that these cryptids are inspiring or perhaps appearing in your art. Could you tell me an example of how one of these creatures, the fairy tales that you're so fond of, have appeared in your art?
I actually had an entire month where all I drew was cryptids from various cultures. One of them actually was made into a t-shirt. It's a Hirlin, I believe is the name. Basically, it's an African cryptid that looks like a human from the front, the very like beautiful face, but when they turn around, the back of their head is actually a hyena head that would devour whoever they tricked into following them.
Wow. Are there a lot of... That actually sounded pretty familiar to me, the idea of a apparently beautiful woman luring you to a monstrous death. Is that a pattern that you've noticed, or is that just something my brain's throwing together?
No, actually, that's a very, very, very common pattern in every culture in the world, to have various creatures that resemble like very beautiful human beings, whether they're male or female. most commonly we are accustomed to hearing about the female counterparts, whether it's the Kirin, mermaids, sirens, the Huldra from Nordic mythology. But there are some male counterparts as well. I think the most relevant that I can think of off the top of my head is the alabaster, which is more like a Slavic Russian creature that's meant to be a fallen star that becomes just the absolute most beautiful man you've ever seen, and any woman that lies with him actually burns to death.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Could you tell me about another lesser-known fairy tale or creature? Because you talked a lot about unicorns. I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of a unicorn at this point, but
yeah,
what's something else?
Everyone's heard of unicorns. They're very different ones. I think one of my favorite kind of creatures are probably like, a lot of people have heard of gremlins, and they're very familiar with the movie, but not a lot of people know where they came from. Gremlins were actually thought up or first started appearing in like texts and everything in the 1940s during World War II. Gremlins were supposed to be these little monsters that lived in planes and would mess around with the engine. So those like first appeared there, and like from there on, like it's become this pop culture thing that's way off from the original. So they're just like supposed to be small, grotesque little monsters that really messed with your planes.
So that's an example of a legend that came from slightly more modern times than we would expect if it's talking about plane engines.
Yeah, like it's, and like, I mean, there's things like the Dover Demon and Mothman for like more United States ones that are more common. Like the Mothman's been around since not that far off ago. I don't remember the exact date, but like the Dover Demon was like the 70s, was the first and only appearance that was said to have happened.
Is there anything about cryptozoology or fairy tale history that you don't like? And if so, how do you handle that?
There isn't really much about it. I think mostly the only thing I don't like is the fact that it's very looked down upon. A lot of like scientists are or people in general, very snobby, like, oh, you believe in that stuff? And for me, like, it's not so much like a belief. Like, I know there's a lot of people who like want to find Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and like that's one side of it. But like there's the other side for me, like it's more of a historical sense of like just understanding where these legends came from and how so many of the same things appears in so many different cultures, and kind of tracing the trade routes. So for me, a lot of that is just like, well, I don't believe in it. It's like that these creatures are real necessarily. It's more of like, you know, when these legends came about, like what creatures were around that possibly went extinct. So I handle it mostly on the, no, this is the more scientific, historical side of why I love this subject.
Yeah, I think people put a lot of emphasis on whether or not something is true to whether or not it is important. But there's value in a story. If it brings you joy, if it makes you feel something, if everyone's talking about it, there's value in that.
Exactly.
Soks, thank you so much for telling us about something you love today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. If you would like to learn more about cryptozoology and fairy tale history, or our guest Soks, you can find their social media information in the episode description. And don't forget to use the hashtag #LoveThisThingCast to tell us about the things you love. I Love This Thing So Frigging Much is a production of Through the Window Media. This episode was directed by Sophie A. Katz and edited by Melissa Block. You can find us at Through the Window on Twitter, Instagram, or Tumblr. That is THROU the Window at all those social media sites. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and you'll hear from us again soon.